All right. Hello, everyone. It is time for us to do our podcast. Thank you for showing up and tuning in and showing us that there is value here in this conversation. I think this podcast space is something that the four of us just enjoy a ton. So thanks for being here also.
Yeah.
All right, here's a question I've been thinking about, and so it's a question inspired by the Psalms, but also a question inspired by like our own journey and the journey of church. So it's a question of being authentic, and is there a authenticity ceiling that is holy, and that there are things that are just between you and God? Coming at it from a standpoint of, I think a culture I grew up in is, so if I have a God experience, or if I have something wholly painful or wholly awesome, the first thing that I think is, how do I share this? How do I turn it? How do I, as many people as possible? Are there experiences that you all have, good or bad, that as they're happening, it's like, this is between God and I, and this is it. It is not to be shared. It is not to be divvied out for everyone else to experience it, because they shouldn't experience it. This is mine. All right, go.
I've experienced two primary paths leading out of that question. One is when something occurs where it is just like, it is so clear in your face, there's nothing to be processed, it just is. And the only thing left to do is to share. Yeah. It's like, I don't know, like I'm having a hard time thinking of an example, but it's just like, I just experienced the most incredible thing. Like, let me tell you about it. The other path is where you experience something and you know that there's value to it, but you haven't taken the time to understand the value to it, or there's deeper layers, and if you just come out with it and like, I don't know, a lot of people are verbal processors, and I think that's really important. And even in those times, like, it's been really helpful to just like talk to people about like, okay, I don't feel like I've crossed the finish line or reached any conclusions, but here are some of my thoughts, like basically asking them to help me kind of carry the ball forward here, so I can like, I feel the weight of this thing, but I don't know what it is that I'm holding. And if you jump to I'm going to share this with everybody too quickly, assuming or not pursuing the end of it, it's kind of like selling a painting before it's finished. Yeah. And it's just like this mess of color, and it's got a vague outline and like a background, but like actually taking the time to like sit and think about what is it that I'm holding on to? Like, what did I just experience, or learn or feel? And I think those things, they like stand out to you. Like, you just like know it in the core of your being of like, ooh, there is something weighty here. And if I don't stop, I'm going to miss it. And if I give it away too quickly, it's never going to become what it is supposed to be.
Is there the assumption in that, though, that everything at some point is going to be given away? And I'm coming at it from, for instance, Pastor Allen's vocabulary of cultivating intimacy with Jesus, or how in our bringing at the central point of Christianity, all of us have been taught, is the only thing that matters is having a personal relationship, right? It's a personal thing. So taking the term personal and then intimacy. Are there
so I, yeah, like I totally understand what you're saying there. I think before we talk about should they, I think it's good to talk about just the posture of our heart. So I grew up in a family that it was so weird, like my extended family. Like on the one hand, everybody was like way too involved in people's lives. Like it was just annoying. But at the same time, people were also very intentional about presenting a certain image. Right. And I know my wife kind of experienced the same thing. Right. So that was just this weird kind of juxtaposition of, well, we're going to let you see what we want you to see, but we're going to also be very involved and over involved in people's lives.
Right.
And so kind of with that as my, origin of story in terms of my life, I think the place that I've landed is I should have the posture of being willing to give all those things away and being willing to share those. But just because I'm willing to share those things doesn't mean that I necessarily have to. I think that's really where wisdom enters into the equation. Stetson, when you were sharing that analogy of a painting, I actually had an analogy going through my mind too. So every Monday, you guys are all part of this meeting, we get together and whoever's preaching that weekend has to present their sermon. Right. And it's our feedback meeting where we get thoughts, ideas, input, that kind of stuff. For me, every time I show up when I'm preaching a weekend, like I've got a full manuscript that I'm ready to present. Like, here is the content. Here's everything. Now, if
I get done on Saturday,
right?
But after the sermon's done,
the point is, like, I step into that place that's like, okay, I have something to offer.
Yeah.
Versus if I showed up and said, well, I don't really know what I'm going to be talking about yet.
Right.
But I think it's going to be good, and I think it's going to be about but like Alan would not respond well to. None of you guys would respond well to that. That would not be good.
That's not you.
It's not me.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think there is a part of this where when you think about all the experiences we have, like, well, how do we communicate those? It's through the medium of a story, right? We have something to share of, here's this thing that I walked through that was hard, or this amazing thing that God did and it was beautiful. It's really good for the story to have a flow and a narrative and a structure before you communicate that. And so to circle back to the question, it's like, well, should we share everything? Probably not. Like there's just wisdom in that. But are there things that we should hold on to and say, I am never going to tell anyone this? I don't think that's healthy either.
All right. Well, yeah.
Wait,
but you can go in there.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, I think back to like when you're talking about upbringing and, growing up in the church and stuff, it is this posture of share the gospel, share everything, share your experiences, your story. And I remember, it's funny, you and I talked about this probably like 5 years ago or something. And I remember, I won't tell your story, but you told me something that happened. It was over 5 years ago. You told me an experience that you had. It included Taco Bell, which I thought was hilarious.
I love Taco Bell.
So good.
You had a spiritual.
Why'd they get rid of the 7-layer burrito?
Cinnabon delights.
And the Holy Spirit.
Cinnamon twists.
But you told me this experience that you had. And it was cool and everything. But then you came back and you said, I wish I wouldn't have told you that because that wasn't for me to share. It was just for me. And I remember like not being offended and being like, wow, like you felt the weight of telling somebody of something you shouldn't have done.
Yeah. Like, so like for
combo
instance,
earlier.
You, the whole thing about, I don't think it's healthy to not, and that's assuming that the thing that you're holding back is something like uber personal. Do you know what I mean? I'm kind of almost going at like that this idea, if there is intimacy between Jesus and I, are there things that happen? It could be a fun thing. Like for instance, I feel bad that I told this this story of the squirrel in my sermon because that was so playful and it felt like God and I had a moment and I exploited that to hit a sermon home. And I've been thinking about that a lot. Are there these times of intimacy that I see him and he sees me? There's a fist bump, and then I'm like, oh, I know how to turn this towards my benefit.
So when I was saying it's not healthy, I'm saying I don't think it's healthy to have a posture of I'm keeping this and I'm never giving it away. Wisdom is, okay, this is a me and God thing. I don't think I need to share this one yet. And I think we've all had those moments where it's like we share something, we're like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have done that. And I'm not talking about sin because we definitely shouldn't do that. But I was thinking about the conversation you and I were having. Just, we keep journals and we write things. And a big part of why we do that is one day we want to give those things to our kids. Yeah. And so sharing our story about the good times and the bad and the hard and the beautiful and all the things in between, like, I want that story to be told to my kid. Like, I want them to know that. Now, are they ready for that right now? No, of course not, because they're kids. But a day will come when they're going to want to know, like, hey, Dad, how did you navigate through this thing? Or what were you thinking through when our family was dealing with this? And if I was kind of at the posture of like, well, that's just me and God or me alone, like, I'm never going to share that. I sometimes think that those things that I learn in those seasons, they can be wasted, and not like in a bad way, but it's like, man, like if there's this beautiful thing that I experienced, it's so good. It doesn't mean I've got to share it with everybody, but like it is so good. And that's what we see in the Psalms, right? David had all these crazy intimate moments with God where he was learning, where he got confronted with sin, and David took the time to be able to tell the story. Now, how far that spread in that time? But he did that so that the journey wasn't wasted.
The thing I'm curious about, and this is curiosity, I'm a curious person, is
that why they call you Whiskers?
What?
That SNL skit?
That does not make
I'm
any
curious.
sense.
Like a cat. That's why they call me Whiskers. Have you seen that?
Yeah. It was just way out of left field. That's
all I can see now.
It was a deep cut.
All right.
That's why they call me Whiskers.
Our assumption is David put it all out there. Here's the book of Psalms. But did he have a ceiling? Did this, like, the things he was putting out to the public, because his heart posture that I've been sitting in is like, I want to be across the table from him and say, there was so much more. And he goes, and then I want to like turn it off and be like, all right, it's time to hang out.
But when you look at David, like he was so incredibly vulnerable. Like the stuff he penned, I'm like, I don't know many leaders today in the church who would be willing to be that vulnerable with the things that they've walked through.
Absolutely.
And I would suspect that the reason David was willing to share so much is because he didn't look at the things he walked through thinking about whether or not he was going to nail a sermon by sharing it.
Right.
Like
So-
he was just vulnerable.
A question. This is it could be a very naive question, but when David writes these Psalms out, okay, how long from the time that he pens it is it?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, because like I'm thinking about, you're talking about journaling, which I admire people who journal and stuff like that, because how often do we go back to our past thoughts? Like it's very, very few. So I love that. But yeah, I'm thinking of the time between that, because was it not for that time, but for a future generation type,
Why can't it be for both?
Oh, it could be. I'm asking, do you guys know?
I mean, so there are probably a handful of different opinions,
Sure.
and that there are different types of Psalms. There's different time periods. I always bank on him being human, and he is a king, has a kingdom, and especially the Psalms that are songs. I think he wants his kingdom to sing his songs.
Yeah.
Like these are the things that are bringing us together. He is someone who seems to be very present. He's someone that him and God exist in the present time. It seems that if he gets too far in the past or too far in the future, it would crush him. I mean, I'm sharing a bit of vulnerability of how I'm trying to understand him during the sermon series and seeing all of his human components.
Yeah.
I think about him being someone who's been to battle, and they say he was behind tens of thousands of deaths, right?
Yeah.
And I think about the PTSD he would have.
Right.
I think about how did he get off the couch. I think about all those types of things, and him having to flee from Saul and that whole time span, the PTSD he would have from that, the trauma, the idea that his father did not value him enough when Samuel had been trying to find the king, that he didn't even bother to call him to be present. The trauma from that, it's like he was a big ball of trauma, and somehow he's the man after God's own heart.
When I think a big part of that, like, so in today's world, the reality is, like, we're all obsessed with image. Most of what we think about ourselves goes through the filter or the lens of what do other people think about us, right? So if we feel good, it's because we think other people feel good about us, right? This is why we have mirrors everywhere we go. This is why on Instagram you've got like 100 different filters, which is always funny when you see celebrities get caught because they post a picture and then someone's like, well, I actually got the real one here, and that's not what you look like, right? And I think we're prone to do this in the church as well. Right. We are image obsessed. Like, you could call it like a hallmark of Western society. But David, for all the trauma, for all the brokenness, for all the things, like, he didn't give a rip what anybody thought about him. Like, he danced naked or with a loincloth, right? As the ark was coming into Jerusalem, he was vulnerable and open about his sin and his brokenness. Yep. And I think it's because David, while he valued the love of the people and he loved the people of Israel, he didn't need them to think about him in a certain way. At least I'm not convinced that he did. Like, he was just like, no, I only care about what God thinks about me. And I think that's actually the secret to his vulnerability. And I think, honestly, that's why so many of us struggle to be vulnerable and to be open, is because we're not living for, that old Christian cliche, live for an audience of one. Like, we're not living for an audience of one. We're living for an audience of 7 billion. Everything we do, we think through the lens of how are they going to think about this? So if you're going to post something online, are people going to like it? Are they going to laugh? Are they going to engage my comments? Even for us, like, when we do our sermon feedback, it's like, well, are they going to listen? Are they going to like it? Are they going to engage? It's like, man, like, how much more free could we be to just be ourselves and to be vulnerable and to be raw, like, in the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, if we stopped caring what other people thought?
A guy named Henry Nouwen wrote this book called...
I love Nouwen. He's so good.
He really is. He wrote this book called The Way of the Heart, and it feels like he wrote it like for people in ministry, but it applies to everybody. But the core of it, at least that I remember from like the beginning chapter, and I think this was a theme throughout, is he tried to make this really strong argument that you are nothing. Which is kind of contrary to like even like what we try to communicate within like Christian circles. It's like, you are created by God. Like, he thinks like the world of you, like you are an image bearer of God. But Henry Nouwen is like, well, you're nothing. Like,
yes, but
like, Nate, thank you.
Let's go get Taco Bell.
You like,
I love Taco Bell.
Like, I can't say it like more than how he said it. It's like, you're nothing. And it's not until you embrace your nothingness that you can actually experience freedom and like live your life in a purposeful way. Because if we try to build ourselves up to be more than what we are through our career or through our social media posts. I love that you're on your phone right now.
No, I'm pulling up a quote.
Doing the podcast.
I'm getting a quote because there's something to say.
Just kidding. Or like, but no, like what you said was spot on. It's like through like social media or like us. Like you're absolutely right. It's like the last time I preached, like it had been 6 months, and I was like, have people forgotten me? I need to like get back into like the memory
My name is Stetson.
of these people. Like I need to like reestablish. It's like, and that's just garbage. And like it made me think about that book a lot, and I had to remind myself, I was like, there's just so much freedom and just like, I am nothing. Like this sermon, this social media post, like this advancement in my career can do nothing for me because I am always at bedrock bottom level. And so I don't need these things. And he talks about just like the pressure that we feel when we try to like build ourselves up and we have these things underneath us to like raise us up, and we have to maintain these things and the structural integrity of these things and like, and that it's just consuming. But when we kind of get off these platforms that we've created and we're just at like this base raw level, there's a lot of freedom in that to be really vulnerable. It's like, how can vulnerably sharing this cause me to decrease in value when I'm nothing? You can't get lower than that. Like, you have nothing to lose if you have nothing. And it took me a while to like wrap my mind around that, because the concept's like, well, wait a minute. It's like, yes, God loves us. And like, yes, we are image bearers of him. But I think that's kind of the point. We are image bearers of him.
Yeah. All right. So I heard this like parable type of thing a super long time ago. And upon hearing it, I didn't understand it. And so I kind of have thrown it out. But hearing you talk about this, it brings back this parable that I heard. Okay. And so I'm going to put it out here and see if it kind of helps.
Okay. Right.
I'm hoping to gain understanding.
Okay.
There is this sage who comes to the point in his life that all he wants to do is to see the face of God and to sit at his feet and be taught by him. So in this journey, he goes to God's house and he bangs on the door. And bangs on the door. The door doesn't open. And finally, God's door opens and God says, "Who is it?" And the sage says, his name, let's say Hank. I am Hank the Sage.
Hank the Sage.
Right? Okay,
Sage Hank.
So God opens the door. Who is it? It's Hank. And then God says, "Go away," and closes the door. And so Hank goes back to his village, his town, and a huge amount of time passes, but the desire is burning in his heart. So I remember this parable like being like 10 years pass, 15 years pass, something like that. And so Hank's like, man, I just want God. And so he goes to God's house again, and he bangs on the door, and the door doesn't open. And finally, the door opens again, and God says, "Who is it?" And Hank says, "It's you." And then God says, "Come on in." Mm-hmm. All right, help me understand.
What does Hank do for a living? I'm just kidding.
He has a job at Taco Bell.
Plumber.
Or is this a part of the podcast that's going to be cut out?
No, as I think about that, right? You know, first part of the parable, Hank is wanting to go away from everywhere he is and to go and to be with God and to learn from God. And God tells him to go away. Right? He never said no.
Yeah.
Right? He never said, "Oh, I'm not gonna be with you. I'm not gonna teach you." It's just go.
Yeah.
And I don't know if when Hank went away, like he realized that God was with him. I got no idea, man. I'm not good with parables.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's fun about them is there isn't a good answer, right? It's more of a conversation. I ended up being in this place of like, if all he wanted had been God,
Then that
he
would be
finally
enough.
got to the point.
Yeah.
Compared to just being taught by God or.
And I think that that's a good place that we ultimately all want to go. But I don't know that we necessarily can start there, right? Because there takes a certain maturity, there takes a certain journey you've got to go through life really to get to that point. And I think God's okay with that. Like, I think God understands our humanity. He understands, like, man, when my kids come up to me and ask me to do certain things or say they want certain things, like that, if I were to do them as an adult, would be like, that's stinking ridiculous. Like, what are you doing? Like, I don't do that to my kids.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're kids.
I do.
Like, Jenny's like, no. I think God meets us where we are.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like totally appropriate and that's totally okay. So, right, if anybody's like listening to this and they're like, well, I don't know, I just want to learn from God. Like, I don't feel like I'm at the place where like God is just enough. It's like, well, that's okay. God will meet you there. God's not like, you can only experience me if you do X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, you're human. I'll meet you. And that's what this series is all about. God doesn't meet us once we've perfected humanity. God meets us in the depths of our humanity. So whether we're mature or immature, broken or whole, God meets us right where we are.
That's good.
When we say, we want you.
It's good because there's the assumption from our point of view that who David and God are throughout the book of Psalms, it's identical, right? Like they're at the same phase. How David sees God, but it's like there's a huge time span and there's something that's being built over time that you're able to see that there are some Psalms that are really, really deep. And there are some that aren't. And you're able to see that there's different parts of the journey. I don't know. I think there's value there. And especially our own journey of the goal is not to be, I don't know, like, yeah, I don't even know how to end this, but yeah.
It makes me, like the parable makes me think of something I was taught in college that when I heard it, I was like, oh, yes, absolutely. Like, people are stupid. Why are they doing this? And then the more time went on, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, there could be something like really good here, yet I understand the caution. Like, the person said, we were created in the image of God. We must not create God in the image of us. And I get that.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But like boiled down to its basics, like it's like if God was a number, 3. Okay, translate.
There you go.
And it's like you were created in the image of God, so you look like a 3. That statement of like, don't create God in the image of you is kind of like saying, you look like a 3, but you can't make God into a 3. But like God was a 3. And he created you in the image of a 3. So I think to a degree, we have to. Like, what else do we have to go off of?
That's all I got.
Like, we were created in the image of God. There's something to be learned here with a ton of caution.
Oh man, I think that
God has a beard.
That opens up a whole other can. I mean, he would then. I mean, like the devil's advocate, they'd say, "Well, that's all the pagan gods."
Sure. Yeah.
Zeus
absolutely.
was created in the image of humanity. Hermes,
100%.
in the whole thing that they're just different depictions of different parts of the human soul.
100%. And yet, in the parable that you shared,
Yeah.
like the reason why I thought of it is like it came to mind right away. It's like, I'm you. Okay, come on in. I heard I saw the man who taught me this thing.
I'm
like,
in your image.
Don't create God in your own image. It's like, well, the sage can't do that. But then it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, if I can learn things about God from my kids, from you guys, like, there's something there.
Yep.
But you're absolutely right. Like, it has been taken too far.
Yep.
And like gods have been created in the image of self. And I'm sure none of us have a clear picture of who God truly is. And it is tainted by our own self-perceptions of that's like totally connected to us.
Can I close by reading a quote that I think kind of encapsulates a lot of the different places we've gone
Let's do it.
in this conversation?
I would love that.
It's C.S. Lewis out of Mere Christianity. Like when you were talking and you were like, this is the first thing I thought of. He says, give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. Submit to death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day, and death of your whole body in the end. Submit with every fiber of your being and you will find life. Keep back nothing. Nothing that you have not given away will really be yours. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay.
Come on.
But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown in.
That was beautiful.
That's great.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us and being part of our family and our journey and just this conversation. It's an honor to be able to experience this together. And that's it for today.
We'll see you next time.